Hello. Welcome to Body of Knowledge, where we believe that the body helps make knowledge. I'm laughing to myself as I'm saying that because right now I feel like my body is preventing me from accessing anything. I'm starting this vlog as an exploration to see what comes. If something emergent does come, I'll timestamp it. My whole day has kind of been frozen in time, and it's now after 3 p.m. But I'm waiting for a call from the doctor. I'm hoping that starting this video will, prompt the call to come. I'm waiting to hear if I broke my knee or not. Weird, right? Mostly weird because I'm not in any pain, but my knee is like a little grapefruit. I fell at the airport 2 weeks ago going to Colorado, and I was hoping that the swelling would go down, but it has not. So I went to urgent care yesterday, and they were like, your knee might be broken. And I'm like, it doesn't hurt, and I've been exercising and going to the gym. And he's like, don't do that. And I'm like, ah. So I woke up early, went and got the x-ray done I was done by 9. Now it's 3, but I feel like I can't do anything because I'm waiting for this call from the doctor. Okay. Anyways, what I wanted to talk about at the end of the last video was a workshop that I did this weekend. I signed up last minute, and it was with the editor of PMPress, which is a small press oriented towards social change. And that guy, Ramsey, he has been in the business for decades, like a fountain of information. And also, what was helpful for me is on education, if that's the right term. I edited a young adult literature magazine for a while. I have friends who have gotten books published, was in this writing group out of which several successes came. You couldn't tell by that sentence I just said, but that's what editing is for, which does not exist in this format. In any case, I was more involved, I guess, in the world of commercial publishing. Also, I was an audiobook narrator. So I had more than the average amount of knowledge about publishing, which in this case kind of held me back, I guess. And it was a very long weekend, and exhausting. It was like maybe 19 hours, maybe a little less. I mean, it was all day Saturday, or at least all afternoon Saturday and Sunday, and then Friday night. And we were supposed to be classmates from West Coast to East, so we were on West Coast time, but then everyone in the class ended up being on the East Coast. So on Friday, our class went till midnight, and everyone's like yawning and so exhausted. And at the end of Friday, I was like, I am so tired. I have barely rested in 2 weeks. I am tired. I am grieving. I am busy. Why did I do this? And it ended up being quite the informative experience. And it was mostly focused on book publishing, which wasn't what I was hoping to get out of it, but sometimes I think the best things are the things that we don't expect. Anyways, the first night we were kind of learning about the history of publishing, the trends of publishing, And I think Ramsey's most important point, he has two that he shares, but I can only remember one. One stood out to me, which is that publishing is not really commercially viable. And then I was just listening to a podcast of this woman who's like an expert on Italian history, talking about how all the early presses went bankrupt. And that's continued basically till present day. Not that they go bankrupt, but that they are subsidized by the wealthy. But when we made that switch towards more commercialization with people buying up publishing houses or newspapers and the like as a commercial venture, that's when we really started to see the homogenization and the cuts and things like that. That point was so key and important for everything else that followed. The point is not that we shouldn't publish. Disseminating ideas is important, and it's always going to be important. What we have to be clear and aware of is our intentions. Why are we doing something? So, for example, an academic might publish a book to build their CV in order to get teaching jobs or speaking gigs, any of the like. Then you have other people publishing books, similarly, not to make money, but for the opportunities that having a published book provides. And then we asked a little bit about like, okay, then why don't we self-publish? Especially because so much of what the publishers used to do, like editing, like marketing, things that were very standard for publishing to do in the past, they don't do anymore. So if the publisher is not doing anything, why not self-publish? And the answer is twofold. First, if you're self-publishing for money, then you're making the mistake of believing that publishing is commercially viable. Hardly anyone is going to make money off of selling their books. Even some of the bigger published names are still making a lot of money from movie rights, from translation rights, from speaking gigs, from getting jobs related to having the book. Course sales are becoming increasingly more prominent. And all of those things that you get from publishing are going to be easier to get if you do it with a press. And then it occurred to me as we were going through all of this, like, the ethical choices that we all have to make under capitalism are oftentimes so difficult to make. However, the decline of publishing makes it easier to make a better choice. Instead of going through all the hoops to get an agent in order to be published at one of the big four now? It was big five, I think it's big four now. And being one of many names on that roster and this large conglomerate who doesn't care about me or my ideas, it seems now like the better and easier option to go with a smaller press such as PMPress, for like a work meant for general audiences. Right, if I was going to do an academic work, I'd want to go with an academic press. But it's easier to make the choice to go with smaller presses who are more ideologically aligned. Because if I'm going to have to pay for the editing, pay for the marketing, learn to sell myself and all of these things anyways, regardless of where I get published, then I might as well do it with a business that is positively changing the world. So that was like one big takeaway for me, because I've been thinking of turning my master's thesis into a course and maybe into a book, in order so that all of my research can reach a wider audience, because I think it is important. I think it is impactful. I think it can positively move us in the direction of social change. I want my research to reach people. And books are still a way to do that. However, we talked briefly about the rise of illiteracy in adults. So also thinking of other ways to disseminate my research and information, like courses, for example. So coming from my previous publishing experience, I was like, okay, I need to put together a book proposal and get an agent and then go out reaching these publishers and blah, blah, blah. And learned that actually for a lot of these smaller presses, I don't need an agent. An agent might just complicate things. And oftentimes he said the agent is more interested in right now, getting the most money possible right now. Whereas what I am interested in is the longevity of my idea, the reach of my idea. How far can my research go? How much change can happen from it? So that, like, already two big things to come out of that workshop. Like, I don't need an agent, and I know now very concretely that I want to work with a small press, and so I can like let go of the FOMO of working with a big press. Like, I can let go of the prestige, which is kind of fake. So those were two good things. And then another good thing is we did a writing exercise and then an editing exercise, and for that we partnered to edit each other's work. And I got partnered with somebody who I think is going to be a really good writing partner going forward. I had my writing group in the past, but when I stopped writing fiction, I left that group. They are all fiction writers and have struggled to get really good feedback of depth. I worked on my Spinoza paper. I rewrote it in alignment with the exercise. But that paper at this point has had, I took that to a different writing group that I recently joined, had 3 people read it. I had my peer reviewer read it. I had somebody else read it. So that's already 5 off the top. Now it's gone onto Canvas, which is our discussion board, and I've gotten 2 or 3 comments there, and hardly any critical feedback. I wrote this again for this assignment, exchanged it with my partner, and right off the bat, like, asked me 3 questions that immediately strengthened the paper. And so we just met today because we're in a different class together and we both want to create a course. And so we just met today to talk about that. And it's just so helpful, as she said at the end of that talk, to like actually have somebody listening close enough to ask those critical questions that make your work better for you. So I'm so excited that we got matched together and got to work together, because I've had other classes with her, but in a Zoom class, even in breakout rooms, it's hard to get to know people, like even in a breakout group of like 5 or 6 people. But actually getting to see how somebody gives and receives feedback, we don't have a lot of opportunities for that. So that's really big, and I'm really excited about that. Also, the last part of this big weekend workshop was to start drafting a pitch to a press. And that was the hardest part for me. Also, just so you know, right now I am both like really excited and jazzed because I've been working on this project that I'm super excited about for like 3 hours, and then she and I chatted for an hour, but I'm also really tired because of all of that. So I'm like waiting for this call. So like energetically, I'm not feeling coherent. If that's coming across, that's why. Anyways, the last part of this workshop was writing this pitch. We started with what is the book about? What is the book? And I was like, I'm writing this. I'm like, wow, this is such a cool book. I want to read this book. And then we got into the personal authority building. Who am I and why am I the person to write this book? And that was an exercise. And my impostor syndrome was like,
oh, hello, welcome, I am here. You are not the person to write this book.
And oh my gosh, like this happens to me frequently. And I was telling our group this for a different class, not this semester. I had to write a book review, and I actually had reviewed a book that had been put out by PMPress that I really liked. I really liked the book. I thought it was well done. I did have some criticisms. I put those in, but overall, I liked the book. I turned it in. The professor wrote back. He was just like, wow, you make a really compelling case for this book. I'm going to buy it. And like immediately I was just like, what if I'm wrong? What if what if he disagrees and I'm wrong? And like, what if this is an awful book? And right, the moment that I got positive feedback in that way, all this self-doubt came up. Similarly, so part of the book proposal, he said to include a CV, and I have a CV. To finish my master's, we put together like a little packet of work to look for future work. And I got my current job with that CV, and it has the things that I've done, the sensuous writing workshops I've done at universities. I really wanted to talk about my interest in Spinoza and joy because that's where my research directions lie. And since it's an academic CV, it does have my research interests on there. The other things that I've been doing, these immersive somatic workshops, and it's the very thing that my research is arguing against. I think the reason I'm able to do it is because I am doing it like every day. I got hired at this organization where more than half the board has a PhD, and one person made the comment, she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so like, your CV is so interesting and so exciting, and wow, sensuous writing, and that's amazing. And I just immediately felt unworthy. There's this person with this PhD and a focus on genocide studies, and I'm like, I like pleasure. And that's what I distill it to. The moment that I get put under a microscope, instead of being like, pleasure helps us build capacity so that we can affect social change, I'm just like, wow, I'm focused on frivolous things. And like, that's a real problem. And because I'm experiencing that problem, I know that I'm not going to ignore it in my work, because that voice isn't coming from nowhere. It's coming from this culture that I'm immersed in. And it's exactly what I'm fighting against actively on a regular basis. So I think that's just a tension that I have to live with. And it's easier now than it was before, but I immediately feel like I should rewrite that book review. I should tone down my CV. I can't possibly submit a book proposal. I can't possibly have a book published. Who am I? And so I did bring that up. And what was interesting is that there were 4 of us, and then the professor, the teacher, and everyone spoke to different levels of that experience. One person said they wrote their that personal part in the third person for the first draft, and then went back and changed the pronouns. Someone else said they skipped it all together and didn't make the connection that there might be something deeper until the conversation emerged. And then the teacher said, yeah, this is something that is fairly new, especially for academics. It was, in the not so distant past, that you could just be a professor and, you know, do your research in your university, maybe get some papers published, maybe attend some very narrow conferences and the like. And now we all have to be selling ourselves. And so how do we do that in a way that is confident and true without tipping over into being an asshole? So it's like this line to learn to walk. And it's not an easy one to walk, especially when you feel like the work you're doing is just outside the status quo. It requires a lot of capacity. And I am much more comfortable doing that as not myself. By which I mean, like when I was a musician or when I did theater, like I have sang in a stadium of 10,000 people. And that, you know, I was a little nervous beforehand, but I did it and I wanted to do it and I put myself out there to do it. And I'm happy I did it. And I feel like I was like, not me, this neurotic self, but I was a different version of me. Like I'm still me, but like I was able to let go of all of that self-doubt in order to step onto the stage and sing. I'm also thinking, going back, I think I mentioned my clown stigma. Why do they have that red nose? Why do they have those big shoes? I hate it. I think it's so stupid. Why are you doing that? But the idea is staying with me because clowns and tricksters and minstrels and these types of characters have had access and the ability to express ideas that we don't have in everyday life. So I've, you know, that's been in the back of my mind. And then yesterday in class, we were talking about reproducing the grammar of violence. And we read a paper by Saidiya Hartman. And we were talking about how recreating violence can be just as violent as the original violence. And one example somebody brought up is, I can't remember the name, but there was a white woman who painted Emmett Till in the open casket, and that was in the Whitney. Why was that necessary? Was that helpful? Did that lead, that felt gratuitous and violent? But also, if we don't express the violence, then people will connect to us on their own level. And so then the example that I brought in was like, if you are in depression and you tell somebody I'm depressed and they've been sad before, then they're like, why can't you just get over it? I deal with this a lot with anxiety. By anxiety, I mean like I feel like I am crawling out of my skin, and sometimes my skin hurts because I am so sensitive. And someone was just like, you're just thin-skinned. And I'm like, okay. And I felt so unseen and so hurt by that. And so there has to, and so this was like a conversation that we were having, that sometimes we do have to articulate the violence in order for the point to be accurately made. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't pander to the people who are going to use that as fuel for further violence later? And the professor said I should look into some of the surrealists, people who have explored violence through surrealism. And someone mentioned a movie that's recently come out called Slanted. I'm gonna watch that. But it did make me think of the TV show The Boys. I'm about to give a spoiler alert and a trigger warning here. But I have experienced sexual violence. I have witnessed in books and on the screen depictions of sexual violence. In The Boys, there was a scene that was incredibly graphic and also surreal, and one of the best depictions of sexual violence that I have ever seen. And in this scene, the character, the Deep, is being raped. And awful. But does it in such a way that changes the lens in such a way that it's destabilized enough that you have to come to it with a fresh perspective. So there's something about like the surrealism of it there, and thinking about, again, this performance art aspect of the dissertation that I might be getting into. And then I was thinking of something else. I was in the class discussion, this is like a different discussion. We were talking about our final projects. And one person is going to do a translation project, and then there's this other guy from the South, a heavy Southern accent, and he said, sometimes I feel like I have to translate myself out of the South so that people don't think I'm dumb. And then I said, I'm actually trying to think of how I can do this the opposite way. I am thinking about doing a Spinoza channel, and I'm going to call it the Spinoza Girly, and like put on a character like Elle Woods, like have my hair in like a big ponytail and wear pink and talk about Tuesday panties, and translate it in this other direction as a way of kind of making it maybe not surreal, but not necessarily satire, because one thing Spinoza does is differentiate between laughter and mockery, and mockery is diminishing, whereas laughter is building. And so like Philomena Kunk, for example, I don't know, there's been stuff of hers that has made me laugh, but it does feel like mockery to me. Like it feels like it's trying to tear everything down, and I'm not sure exactly what it's trying to build towards. And that can be like in surrealist projects of all kinds. I'm not quite sure that I'm using the term surrealist correctly. I'm just, for clarity, I'm using it very broadly in these like more imaginative and speculative works. But I'm thinking of Squid Games, for example, very violent and so nihilistic. Like, what's the point of that? It feels like it is just tearing everything down. People are consuming it, eating it up, being entertained by it, but to what end? I felt like it was diminishing, not building. And so I'm thinking of like all this is all in progress, so that's what I'm thinking. I'm just thinking about these public figures, tricksters, clowns, putting on these characters, these performing arts as a way of articulating. Oh, and then how I got there was I was thinking, like, I think I might feel more comfortable talking about Spinoza in a character than I would just being myself. Because when people come at me with misunderstanding, which is always the case, right? We can never fully comprehend another person's. There's always going to be something that we're missing or something contextual that's not lining up. When I do that as a character, number one, I can build it into the character that I don't care. And number two, when that happens, I can just say, oh, they're judging the Spinoza girly, not me. How that will work with book publishing and a book proposal, I'm not quite sure. A pen name is the obvious choice. And I have had 2 stalkers in the past. And so I didn't actually go by my own name for a few years. And then I think it was the Monica Lewinsky was redeemed. And I remember her saying, why do I have to change my name when he's the person who did something wrong? And that has stayed with me. And then I told myself, I was just like, you're not being dramatic. These guys don't care about you. And I went to using my real name and they immediately found me. But what that forced me to do was find support in order to confront them. In one case, I went to the women's shelter and got help. And in another case, I just had my grandma step in. So that's the obvious choice, is to use a pen name, and it's also not something that I want to do anymore. I feel like my capacity and my confidence has grown to the point that I want to be myself. But that also means that if I'm going to do that, I also have to recognize that I need to build a little bit more capacity in order to basically every step forward that I take in visibility means that I need to simultaneously be taking steps forward in capacity building. And that's not a bad thing unless I forget. I just have to make that part of the process. Right? The body and mind are parallel. If my mind is going forward towards its ambitions, I have to work with my body to have the capacity to hold those ambitions. So quite the week. The doctor has still not called, so who knows? My knee could be broken. I hope not. I'll keep you updated. I know that you're so curious. Yeah, so I guess that's the update for the week. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. But I can't think of it. Okay, until next time.